Chronic illness can not only sometimes feel like it's stealing your life, but it can also feel like it's stealing your whole identity. My incredible guest today will talk about what this felt like for her and share her remarkable experience of getting her health and her life back. Hi, everyone. I'm Raelan. If you're new here, welcome. Here you can find over 150 recovery stories from conditions like CFS and Long Covid, and they are even the subject of a research study. With every new interview, we are one step closer to understanding the patterns of what helps most people turn their health around. Today, I am thrilled to introduce Rashlin Bhachu, originally from Kenya, but currently living over in London in England. Rashlin lost years of her life to ME/CFS before finally finding a way to move the needle in her recovery. I'm so excited to help share her inspiring story and learn from her journey back to health. Rashlin, amazing to have you here. Thank you for doing this.
Raelan, thank you so much for having me. It's amazing to be here.
So you have had quite the journey with all of this. How did this all start for you?
Yeah, so I guess I can try and give as much of a whistle stop tour as possible. But I got my diagnosis in 2022, but actually it was ongoing for many years prior to that. So I got COVID in 2020, and that's when it just kind of started to spiral. But I wasn't feeling well prior to COVID, anyways. So I just felt like I was losing a little bit of control of my body, if that makes sense. I was getting ill all the time, but I always was, just always working hard, pushing myself in my career, but also on a physical level. I was always pushing, always training really hard, training for marathons, etc. So I never slowed down. So actually getting sick was just inconvenient more than anything else. And then when lockdown happened and I got COVID, I just never really recovered after that. So my physical capacity reduced a lot, but I just continued to work. I was setting up a business at the time and still working in finance. So I was just pushing myself mentally. So I think the stress overload was getting too much. And already this virus had triggered something within my body, but I just didn't know what it was. So I went for a ton of tests. So everything under the sun just to rule things out, blood tests, just kind of CT scans, angiograms, checking the heart is okay. I did have scarring on my lungs after COVID, but that went. So there was just like this kind of like circus that I was in for like 2 to 3 years before I got diagnosed. And then I got diagnosed with the thing that everyone gets diagnosed with, but doctors don't know what to say. And that was depression. So I wouldn't say that I wasn't presenting signs of like depression, anxiety, whatnot, but it just didn't feel right. And I didn't want to start taking antidepressants. And I think that was when I realized that something had to shift internally, but I didn't really realize what. So my anxiety was like all over the place. I was having like night sweats on a daily basis. I was just anxious all the time, just very stressed. And I felt I was spiraling. I was just losing control. But instead of slowing down, I just did the opposite. I just pressed accelerate even harder. And that just like in hindsight, it just doesn't make sense why I did that. But then I crashed. I traveled and I got back, and then it was just the final blow. So I was getting sick a lot. Like I'd have a couple of good weeks, couple of bad weeks, good weeks, bad weeks. And the bad weeks, I just thought I had like a flu or something, but I was never ill, if that makes sense. I realized now it was just that fatigue starting to creep in. And then the crash was me bedbound for over a month and then housebound for like a year after that. And that's kind of, and then I said to my doctor, I think I've got this thing called chronic fatigue syndrome, because then I guess you're at that point where you're starting to take the recovery into your own hands. And he said, I actually, since you've got nothing else, that kind of makes sense. And then I just saw some other specialists and stuff just to rule everything else out. But yeah, that was the journey to diagnosis. And I think that that one is quite, it seems to be very common with people who have chronic fatigue because it's a diagnosis of exclusion, but it's like a virus that triggers something. And then I guess there are all of these months, even years that pass before you get this diagnosis. And I just felt like I was just spiraling out of control. And in hindsight, I was like, I think there's so much education piece that can happen for us people to be aware of these types of symptoms, whether it's for burnout or chronic fatigue syndrome, chronic illnesses. I just didn't know what was going on. So I just thought the best thing to do was to keep pushing, which seems silly. But yeah, so that was my journey to diagnosis, which I think is very similar to lots of people.
And it's interesting how we get so good at telling these stories. And if you'd never lived through one of these conditions, you'd almost think, well, that sounded unpleasant, but not that terrible. But we know going through it, it's usually terrifying. Where was your head at when you're going through this? What were you thinking?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because you're right. When you do talk about it, it just seems like, oh, well, that just sounds like a lot going on at once. But I was just very lost. And I think it really added to that overwhelm and confusion. And then the kind of anxiety and just that stress and that really, really low mood and just feeling very stuck. So I think it really contributed to that. And I just felt like I was in this never ending horror movie, basically. And I would talk about it a lot. I would complain about it a lot, but I would just feel very unheard. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. But it was very frustrating. So I think I just tried to push myself into other things to distract myself. But then my body was basically just said no.
And when you and your doctor came to this conclusion of chronic fatigue syndrome, what did you think about that? And what happened from there?
So initially I felt relief, as I was like, okay, fine, it's not all in my mind, and what is going on in my body is something, it's telling me that it's something serious. So initially I felt relief, but then I was just I was very, very confused. So one thing that I did do was I got referred on for the parent technique. And that's something that I started doing maybe kind of a month into the recovery period, when I felt a little bit better, to be taken for a treatment, basically. And that really helped. Do you know what the parent technique is?
Yeah, I interviewed Raymond Perrin on the channel quite some time ago, but a high level I remember, but the details of it I don't remember a lot. So if you explain it, that would.
Yeah, so it's just, in its essence, it's kind of like a lymphatic drainage, and the movements in itself are very gentle, but it's like craniosacral osteopathy, and then drainage around the spine and in the breast tissue area. So what I found very helpful about that was it was the first type of examination, quote unquote, that I had where someone said you're presenting signs of chronic fatigue syndrome. Whereas, as we all know, our blood work comes back normal, scans come back normal. Whereas Dr. Perrin has developed these markers that his practitioners would look for when they are kind of assessing your body. So it's within your spine, and the inflammation that's within the brain area as well. So the brain fluid movement. So I hope that I'm explaining this properly. But that's what it is in its essence. And people with CFS would present a lot of this inflammation within the spine, breast tissue, and the craniosacral area as well. So it was an ongoing treatment that I did, and I felt that it really helped. It got worse. I got worse before I got better, but that helped to reduce the inflammation a lot within my body. But the other thing that really helped me with it was that I felt I was seeing a practitioner on a weekly basis who understood what I was going through, because all the practitioners that I was seeing, she was working with people who had chronic fatigue, ME, and long COVID. So I felt very seen and very heard. And that one really, really helped me in those kind of beginning stages. And I still do it kind of as upkeep every now and again, just to help with any inflammation, etc. So that kind of helped in that early stage to just kind of be connected with someone who I could relate to. But very quickly, aside from the relief, it's I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad I can stop, because a doctor has told me that I couldn't get out of bed. So not a doctor was saying to me, but it's like I got validation through something else that I can stop working and stop pushing myself. I mean, I was so sick, I had no choice. And that's in itself, I found very curious when I look back at it, because we seek this validation from a medical perspective and the societies that we live in. And if we've ticked this box and we're told that right, you can stop, then you stop, but you have not, your body's giving you the signs all the time. You know yourself when you're not feeling good, but you don't get that validation from within you. So that was one thing I found very curious. But then it became very apparent quite quickly that even though the doctors that I met with and I consulted with were sympathetic and also recognized that this is a real issue, which I know I'm quite grateful for given experiences that other people have had. It was also that, well, we can't do anything medically for you. So I was like, well, now what? So you're in this like crash stage where your symptoms are so. I remember one really weird thing was when I would go for a doctor's appointment and it would be like needing help to get the train into London. And before, this was something you did on autopilot, commuting or, being around like city sounds and whatever. And I started to have panic attacks because I was like, I feel so unsafe. Any sound would like make me so hypersensitive. And that for me was very bizarre in those early stages because that like hit me out of nowhere. So it was just that kind of, well, I don't have the capacity to even research how to get better, even know how to get better. So it went quickly from like relief to like, oh my God, how do I get out of this? So I think it was like a mixed bag of emotions, which is why I think the mindset work is so important in this journey.
Absolutely. It's always so interesting to me how, even after all these interviews and all these years, every time I speak to someone like yourself, there's just so many light bulbs going off for me. And so much of what your story resonates with my own. I know we all have our unique journeys, but there's just so much that we all go through. And I think in the moment, it feels like we must be the only person in the world going through it. That there's just so many similarities.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite the emotional roller coaster that you go through, and it seems to be some sort of set stages that we all kind of have to pass through, that like confusion, the fear, the terror, the denial, pushing through, the lack of validation, the relief, oh wait, the short lasted relief, because now what? I'm sicker than I've ever been, and people are telling me it's on me to figure this out. So it's a really tough place to be.
What you also said, because one thing that I feel that all of us experience as well is this is so misunderstood, like on a kind of medical level and within our society as a whole. Like illness should fit a box. A person who's ill should look a certain way. So I feel that all of our, not all, but such a big amount of our energy goes towards explaining what we're feeling. And a lot of the times you'll get like pockets of friends and family who understand it, but you'll get a lot of people, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. Like we will get tired. And I feel that that's quite unique to ME/CFS, long COVID, is that, and chronic illness in general, is because it doesn't fit these like neat little boxes, that so much of our like internal frustration is towards like, they're kind of banging our head against the wall. Like this is a real thing and I'm trying to explain it to you and you're just looking at me like, what? So I think that also adds to that kind of those beginning stages.
Yeah. And there's so many layers with the diagnosis. I know we've all talked about this many times. It's just still, that label of chronic fatigue syndrome. We need a word other than fatigue. Language, or English, is such a complex language in that it has, it's malleable. We can make up new words all of the time, but yet we haven't come up with a new word for fatigue so that it explain what's happening, because it's not the fatigue that we're all used to from our life. It's something completely different. We just don't have the vocabulary for it. And plus, it's so much more than just fatigue. So not only are we trying to explain something with this really silly sounding name to other people, we're also trying to give ourselves permission to go into this survival mode to like rescue our lives, because this is what we need to do. It's serious. But you've got this label that makes it sound like you're just like kind of tired like everybody else and you should just push through. So and I know a lot of people, like my mom, when she had this, chronic fatigue syndrome was the main term that people used, but then the term myalgic encephalomyelitis we started hearing about as well. And she really latched onto that, I think, just because it just sounded more serious. At least maybe if she tells people that that's what she has, then they'll start to take this seriously.
I completely agree. Actually, I was having this conversation just yesterday with someone, and I was like, the name fatigue just doesn't do this justice, unfortunately. And one thing that I noticed what I was doing in those early stages was grappling with that word in itself, fatigue. And I noticed that when I was explaining it to someone, and also even how to recover to somebody, it's like this alarm would go off in my head, being like that other side of me, I would say the gremlin side of me, being like, wow, that doesn't sound like a lot. And I was like, it's
Yeah.
just the way we're conditioned just in general blows my mind. But you're so right. The name fatigue is just doesn't do it justice because we use it like colloquially. I'm so fatigued today. I'm so fatigued today. So when we feel the fatigue that we do on that level, yeah, we need a bit more than just chronic fatigue.
Yeah. So, what did you do from there? How did you start to find your path out of this?
Yeah. So I think for me at that point, and I think in kind of 2021, 2022, when I hit a very low point, I would say mentally, a lot of the work that I started to do then was to recognize triggers, recognize a little bit of what my emotions were telling me, just listen to myself a little bit. And I knew kind of the trigger was COVID for me, as in my trigger virus, but I knew what had led up to it. So I think it's just important to recognize that chronic fatigue syndrome, long COVID, it doesn't happen in a silo. And we kind of have this tunnel vision when we're thinking about recovery and how to get better. But I wanted to really be mindful of what came prior to chronic fatigue because I was like, this just didn't happen overnight. It's been building up over years and years and years of the stress I'm putting on my body, the kind of my behaviors, limiting beliefs, etc. And then obviously there are some factors that we can't control. And I know very much in your case, there's that genetic link with ME/CFS you were saying with your mom. And then, environmental toxins and then the virus trigger, etc. But that kind of mental load that you put on yourself is just massive. And obviously there's the traumas that everyone faces, big T, little t, whatever anyone goes through in childhood. As we all know, it doesn't have to be something massive to be labeled as a trauma. It's just kind of how it stays within the body. So I was very aware of what had preceded my chronic fatigue. So I think the first thing for me was just recognizing that this has all been building up and then it just exploded. So I was like, I need to go back to root cause and just try and decipher and figure out what led me down this path where I felt I couldn't stop when my body was saying stop, where I was having like severe panic attacks, the night sweats, all of that, like these very apparent signs of someone who's just chronically stressed, also very anxious, showing symptoms of depression. So I was like, what's going on there? So I started to do a lot of the nervous system regulation. That for me resonated with me a lot. But it wasn't just kind of rewiring the brain, listening to the thought that, oh, I will never recover, and then rewiring that. I was very curious with what went on before. So trying to get myself out of that fight or flight mode and just being very calm within my body. For a lot of us, the sleep is wow. For people who are as fatigued as we are, the insomnia was horrible. So it was trying to just, well, what is causing such bad sleep to begin with? It's kind of like a contradiction to begin with. So when I peeled back the layers a bit and just started to work, I would say beneath the surface. So like all I explained, the behaviors, the limiting beliefs, regulating my nervous system, getting out of fight or flight. That's when for me, I found that I really started to, I would say, recover. It was really important for me to set good foundation. So just to have like more of an anti-inflammatory diet really helped for me. I've never been much of a drinker, but well, I think when someone with chronic fatigue, it's your quality of life is so poor. So that like kind of the drinking. That was not something that even came, just that was very easy to cut out alcohol. I do like sugar, so I just had to be a little bit careful around that. So that really helped. And then just understanding pacing. I was not great at pacing later in my recovery. I found the concept like a little bit frustrating, but it did help to just have that good foundation and try and get good sleep. And I thought that was good as a foundation, which I tried to keep throughout recovery. But it was doing that like deep inner work that really moved the needle for me. And then I felt like as the later I got into recovery, I actually became a lot happier within myself. I was very frustrated with what was going on around me, but it felt like the fog was starting to clear, if that makes sense. And I started to find like joy in little things. So I latched on to, because for me, I need to keep my brain. When I got out of that initial crash stage, I was like, I need to keep my brain moving. And I've always liked to read. I know some people like drawing, others painting. So I just read, like not a lot, as much as my body could allow me, mostly fiction, and it brought me a lot of joy. It was the simplest thing, and it made me happy in the bleakest of times, and that's what I held on to. So I would say those like first 6 months of recovery, in hindsight, despite how confusing, overwhelming, and all of that, I found it a little bit easier to manage than the later stages of recovery. I found the later stages of recovery very, very tough because I think, and this is what kind of when we all have the setbacks, I tried to do too much too soon. And then you're on that boom and bust, like yo-yo cycle. And that's where I just had to, that I found very difficult. But that's what I did in a nutshell to help me recover.
It's very interesting how you say you found the later parts of recovery more difficult.
Mhm.
Is that because you were starting to feel better and not, maybe keeping in that pacing or recognizing the limitations you still had? Well, what was it about that made that the harder part?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't, it's like I was felt better. So I was like, I can definitely do a lot more. So I started to see people a lot more, maybe go out a bit more, try and do more work. And I was not respecting my body enough. And that for me was another layer in the recovery because I was like, I've not uncovered this because I've clearly tried to make up for lost time, or I think that I can't. Those same tendencies that preceded the CFS were coming back again. So that for me was I need to address this now. Why am I behaving in this manner? Why am I still not letting myself just build after what has happened? So I think I found that a little bit harder to grapple with because I was very keen to get back into life, but I wasn't respecting myself enough. And that was that other type of, that other inner work that I had to do and that layer that I had to uncover. Yeah.
And that is massive. That is something that I hear from people over and over again. And it's through these years of all of these conversations and all of my reading, I'm just seeing that, we are, most of us, living in societies that tell us that we are judged on perfection, that we should have perfect bodies, perfect career, perfect family, perfect vacations to post on Instagram and impressive degrees and all of that. And that, somehow self-care is and really frowned upon and looked at as selfish. Really what you are rewarded for and respected for and valued and judged on is how much you push yourself. And then, as you start to feel better, it can also feel like a lot of people tell me like they've been selfish long enough, like they've put themselves in this self-care bubble, but now that they're feeling a bit better, that reason or that excuse is gone. So it's like, I have to get back out there. I have to do all the things I haven't been doing. And all of that brain training that happened prior to us becoming unwell is still there. That like, go, go, go. I have to do this, that, and that. And it's challenging. I mean, I've been recovered for 5 years now, and I'm still working on it because it's all around us. Those expectations and those messages are coming at us from everywhere.
No, 100%. And I think that's why I think it's a healing process. And I think even if you have recovered, a lot of this kind of inner dialogue is still there that you maybe have to grapple with occasionally on a daily basis, whatever it may be, because it's taken years to get into the states that we were. So it is going to take time to get out of it, especially when we live in a world, in a society, which doesn't respect these type of conditions enough. And actually, we live in the most wellness obsessed society, but everything is tailored towards making us more productive. What can we biohack? How can we be more productive today? How can we? So even self-care is about how to make ourselves more productive. And it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But everything needs to be measured, everything needs to be tracked, but no one really wants to stop to actually find out what's going on at the core and beneath the surface. And that's where most of the answers will lie. So you just move away from what you want and your authentic self, and you move towards what you think a version of you should look like. And that just takes time to unravel because we are molded in a certain way, unfortunately.
And how do you find, now that you have learned all of this and you are where you are, people I'm sure ask you about your journey, and now I know you do work around this with people, because I find when I'm talking to people like yourself, I love these conversations. I could have them all day long, but if I'm just out at some random lunch or work event and the topic comes up, I feel myself tense up because I just think most people haven't gone through what we've gone through, so they don't have any of this information, and everything that we're talking about now is going to sound a little bit insane. So
Yeah.
when you try and speak to these things to people who haven't been through it, or do you even try? And if you do, what is the response that you get from people?
I think that's such a good question because it's something that I've been like kind of dealing with recently. Whereas I feel when I speak to like new people about chronic fatigue syndrome or I talk to them about recovery, I like it's like just like fairy dust I give them, like little sprinkles, and later I'll come back and I'll go, "Oh my God, Rashlin, what were you talking about? Like it doesn't even make sense. Like you didn't even do it justice." And I find that I downplay it a lot because you're right. This whole journey that you go on, the work that it takes, if you've not experienced that, or you might not be that way inclined, because let's be honest, most of us weren't before we got on this journey. You just feel like you're just preaching to the wrong choir. So I think that that is still a work in progress. And I try and explain it through the lens of chronic stress now, and how we're all molded in this way to what, or like how we need to function, what perfection needs to look like. And I think more and more people are having this conversation. So it makes it a little bit easier. And then explaining what nervous system regulation is. We take it for granted because we hear it like every day now. But just explaining what that is and explaining what more of I don't go into details of like root cause work and all of that. But I think to answer your question, it's not something I've gotten like ticked off. I think I still struggle with it. And I think sometimes I like hesitate to explain it. And that's something I'm trying to improve on myself.
Yeah, and it's a massive barrier to recovery, something that we need to address, because I don't even want to go there with people. Sometimes I find myself just giving some brush off answer like, "Oh, that's a whole other long conversation," or I just can't even get into this with another group of people that know nothing about it. And when I interview doctors, they tell me something sort of similar, because when they talk about nervous system regulation and all the things that you've just been talking about and everyone talks about on this channel, lots of patients are just like all the layman people out there that we meet. They've never heard of this before and they don't take it well. So, and it's helping so many people. So, yeah. And, even you and I who do this sorts of things in our life are still shying away from the conversation sometimes. So I think that says a lot. We have a long way to
Yeah,
go.
no, definitely. And I think it's when you're explaining it through that lens of that continuous layer of stress, trauma, environment, etc. It's that kind of, oh, well, we all go through this. So then how come this happened to you? So I think then that could be like an internal dialogue as well. So I think I spoke earlier about that validation, the medical perspective, and this not being very understood. But you're very right. I think as a community, we should get more confident about speaking out about this, because with someone who's been through it, you can talk about it all day long because you found your common ground. But if for someone who's not been through it, it's a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. So where are you now with all of this? Your health, your journey?
I think so. Now I just I just became very passionate about helping others going through the same thing. But I think for me, it was more about helping and working with us. It was more not just let's focus on your symptoms, let's deal with your symptoms, and let's look at it through that lens. For me, it's that whole picture, what's going on. Because for none of us, when we used to go to the doctor, would they ask you what's going on in your life? Tell me, what do you do on a day to day basis? What are your emotions, thoughts, mental health like? So it's that whole picture that really, really interests me. And then how to piece that into life beyond CFS. And I think as I'm quite kind of recent in this recovery journey. It wasn't that long ago that I had chronic fatigue. And obviously there are days where that tiredness, that feeling you remember creeps up on you a little bit. Or maybe it's that worry when you get a virus that, oh my God, I remember when I got those like first viruses or sickness. And it's just trying to remember that we all get tired and not like, oh, this is not going to send you backwards. You've done so much. So I think there is still some days where I need to just, calm myself down because the memory still feels very recent of what happened. And I think that like adds to it a lot, where I think that whole mindset piece is so important. But yeah, for me, just that whole, what's going on in our world, that whole spectrum beyond this like CFS. So not looking at it through this like singular lens, but let's take our whole life into perspective and how can we work on the outer layers. And that really interests me.
So you came through this, and I don't imagine this was the trajectory your life was on prior to this, but you came through it like a lot of people thinking, I want to put what I've learned to use, I'm assuming, to work with people. So how did that come about, and what kind of work do you do now with people? What does that look like?
The idea of coaching always appealed to me. So I was running an e-commerce business prior to this. So I was just like kind of grappling with what next when I was going through the motions of chronic fatigue. And then I did a coaching certification just because I wanted to coach myself. And I was like, well, actually, what I'm learning here is so important because it's helping me so much. So we'll definitely be able to help someone else. And then so I just started to, well, which are the areas within our field that I think maybe someone might need the help with, or who can I most serve? So I think that's why I do the one-to-one work, because I think that's where you can really make a lot of the changes. When a lot of us have chronic fatigue, we're so used to working with a doctor. If you've got a chronic illness, you see your doctor, you have your tests. So there's that regular touch point that you might have with someone, and that doesn't exist when you've got chronic fatigue. You don't have this person who's monitoring your recovery journey, and that's what makes it so difficult. Is that you're monitoring your own recovery journey. You might be patting yourself on the back. You don't have a biomarker that's telling you you're recovering. It's how you feel within yourself. So it's within that one-to-one work that I aim to provide that kind of safety net, but also that more of that hand holding, because it's such an overwhelming, confusing time. I think it was Gabor Mate who said that stress happens because of, uncertainty, loss of control. And it's ironic because all of us are told when we have chronic fatigue, please reduce your stress. Well, that makes no sense to me because you've just diagnosed me with something that is making me very stressed because I don't know how to get better because I've lost all my control. Everything is very uncertain right now. So please tell me how to reduce the stress. So that's something that where I find and I enjoy doing the one-on-one work is because you can take someone through that journey of what does a good foundation look like. And also, I think it's important to say that there is no one size fits all for CFS. Added layer of complexity, but I like to work with people in a way that allows them to trust themselves again, because we all lost that trust somewhere along the way. And we sought that kind of trust within something else, our medical system, society, etc. So we stop trusting ourselves. But actually, we know what's good for our bodies because we become so in tune with it. And we know when we're recovering, we know what nourishes us, what doesn't. So it's allowing people to trust themselves again and to be guided along a path of recovery, but to formulate that themselves as well. Because I'm not going to tell someone, please eat this and you'll get better. Please follow this and you'll 100% recover. And I think that that's really important because the minute you do that, you're losing that control again. And it's a journey that you go on. And it's important to provide that foundation, but allow someone to uncover that themselves.
Yeah, you said so many important things there. It's just really hit the nail on the head, I think, just because there's so many people going through this. And thankfully now we have so much information out there. We have this information coming from all over the place. It's not that there's this one magical keeper of the recovery information with their $20,000 program. And if you don't join it, you're not going to recover. Like the great news is that a lot of people are starting to understand these various paths to recovery, but it is having that support to go through it, because doing this all alone in your bubble can be a terrifying thing. And such a big thing of what we're trying to do is find some joy and some peace and some feelings of safety as you go through the recovery, which can be challenging to do on your own. And then finding someone to work with who not only has flexibility, isn't coming at you with this is the formula, do it this way or else. And then also just someone who resonates for you. Like find someone where you speak to them, you listen to them, and just that alone, your nervous system goes at ease, because we all kind of click with different people. So I love that we have so many health coaches and so many programs now, because without a doubt, people watching right now are going to be like, Rashlin, I really love the way she speaks, the way she explains things. I just feel calm and safe around her. She's the person for me, and for other people, it'll be someone else. So I think you explained that. Really well.
Yeah, because I think, different stories resonate with different people. And of course, in our field, we've all, most of us doing the coaching, the programs, we've been through this journey. So we can speak to that as well. But with the coaching, you empower an individual. And that's so important because you just lost all of that control that you once might have had. And there's a framework I like to work with. It's call it the ARH framework. So it's awareness, regulate, and heal. But within that, we uncover that story of what's going on behind that layer of CFS, aside from doing the good work with laying your foundation, and then your root cause work, your limiting beliefs, your behaviors, and then regulating the nervous system. One thing I feel doesn't get talked about enough is the mindset. I think that's the right word here to use, but the day-to-day of actually going through a chronic illness. So you know how to regulate your nervous system. I maybe do some breath work here or get out of fight and flight mode here. I'm eating properly. But when you might have a day where you're like, what happened to me? So going through those motions with that sheer anxiety that it brings up of not knowing what's around the corner. When will I recover? When will I get back? And that doesn't get talked about enough of how tough it is to actually be in the trenches of a chronic illness. So being able to just work with people to develop more resilience and control over there, but to be able to move past those days of just sheer torture within your mind. And I think that that's really important. And then the healing beyond CFS. Because one thing actually for me, which was very weird when I started to recover, I was so scared of getting better. I was so scared of getting better. And I was like, why? And I realized it's because I was like, oh my God, life is going to go back to the way that it was. So as soon as I get better, I need to be a machine like I was. And it made me so nervous. And then again, that's why I use the onion analogy, because it is so many layers to uncover. And then after I worked through that, I was excited to get better. But as soon as there was that glimmer of recovery, I started to go backwards because I was so frightened of it. So so that's why I think working through that whole the mindset piece, the resilience, all of that is really important around all of the other good stuff that we do.
Yeah, that's such a challenging thing to be honest with yourself about, I think. And I went through something similar, and I talked about this in
Yeah.
my book, but I had to get really honest with myself towards the end stages of my recovery and make a list of, I mean, because I hated CFS. It was just this, to me, this
Oh,
nightmare that had come into my life and caused endless suffering. Then I had to sit down and write, I just sat down and wrote down all the ways that it was serving me. Like, how is this helping me? What am I
yeah.
getting out of this?
Yeah.
Which is a tough thing to go through because I wanted to say freaking nothing, but there were things. And then I thought, if some tiny piece of my mind is holding on to this as something that's helping me and protecting me, how much power does that part of my mind have? So yeah, it's a mindset is so
You
important.
hit the
Yeah,
you hit
very
the
well
nail
said.
on the head, because I think it just like creeps up out of nowhere. This whole like, why am I so scared of getting better? But yeah, it's so important. Yeah.
And I think when it's something you've been holding on to so tightly for so long, it's hard to even just picture putting it down and
Yeah.
moving on. As horrible as it is, what becomes your norm. So you can, yeah.
Yeah. Try to look at
Anyways,
it kind of like, yeah,
so
sorry, like fatigue as a teacher almost. I was like, what is this giving me in my life right now? I was like, I tried to see it in that lens, and on those days, it helped me quite a lot. Yeah.
this has been amazing, Rashlin. I wish I could keep you
Thank you
here
so
all
much.
day long. I learned so much on your journey, so many great insights here. You're just clearly a wonderful person. I'm so glad that you're out in the world helping people because we have such a demand for it. And people watching, please just expand the video description and you will find everything that you need to know about Rashlin's coaching and how to get in touch with her and how to learn more. She's just really an amazing person. I really encourage you to take a look at what she has available there. So I just want to thank you so much, Rashlin, for doing this, for what you do generally
Yeah.
to help people and for taking the time to come here. It's
Oh,
been
no,
so
it was
great
really
meeting you.
nice.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, you're so familiar with your office setup. Your videos help me a lot in my journey. So thank you for all the work that you do. It's just amazing to get these stories out there. You feel you're not alone. So it's truly wonderful to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you to those of you watching. Looking forward to your thoughts and your comments. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got a lot out of it, and I hope to see you in this next one.
Mhm.